Welcome to the My Blue Skies Music Podcast, where we dive deep into the power of music, creativity, and collaboration. I'm your host, Kate Dillingham, cellist and composer, and founder of MyBlueSkiesMusic.com. And my guests today are Marie Incontrera and Dorie Clark. Welcome.
Hey, Kate, good to be here.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So I want to begin a little bit with the topic of discussion, which is artists and artistic collaboration. And I know Marie from some years ago. We played music together. I'm meeting Dorie for the first time here. And I want to just open with saying that Marie has been incredibly helpful in suggesting the idea of this podcast. And so I credit her with inspiring it. And I'll turn it over to you. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you collaborate.
Yeah, so I'm Marie. I'm a composer, and Kate and I met because you subbed in my band, right, in 2017 or earlier than that, at least. Something. So it's been probably about 10 years, close to it, if not. And I also, in my 9 to 5, as they say, is that I run a marketing agency. And so that's kind of how we got talking about, how you could be working on My Blue Skies and kind of getting the word out there with artists and everything like that. And I'm collaborating with Dorie, my very good friend here, who we're working on 2 musical theater pieces together.
And hi, I'm Dorie. I am the lyricist and librettist in this equation. And Marie and I started working together probably in about 2019. We had been friends for several years before that. And when I first met her, she did not do musical theater. She was in the jazz world and the opera world. But I leaned on her heavily to consider the world of musical theater. And I'm so glad that she relented because she has been a fabulous collaborator on the projects that we're doing.
Kate, as you know, I was doing avant-garde jazz and music theater, but not musical theater, opera and cross-genre theatrical work.
Marie was in it for the money.
Yeah, I was in it for the money, as you make money, as much as you can make as an avant-garde big band leader, leading 15 plus musicians at a time for a cut of the door. And Dorie, you saw Fun Home and were really inspired and started writing for theater. And then you did BMI, and you were in class of 2018, which was the year before me, right? And BMI Lehman Engel Musical Theater Workshop, which is kind of a training ground. Alan Menken is an alum of it. The Lopez's are alums of that. So they're responsible for training a lot of people who have gone on to write for Broadway and commercial theater and everything like that. And Dorie convinced me. She's like, you should do this, and we should write a show together. And eventually, so I joined BMI in 2019, and it's a 2-year program. And so in our second year, we started working on Absolute Zero, which is one of the shows that we're currently in development.
Terrific. So Dorie's the lyricist, Marie's the composer. Do you ever cross-section in that, or is it are those the roles that you play?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very collaborative thing, right? Like I certainly take feedback from Dorie on how I've said her lyrics, and she takes feedback from me on how the lyrics sing. But no, I mean, we're very much in our roles, but at the same time, all of that has to be very well married, right? The lyrics and the music have to work very, very well together. So there's a lot of communication and a lot of, I think a lot of trust back and forth in between that, in terms of, trusting each other for feedback and trusting each other to say, like, hey, this is not working, or, can we try this, or what have you?
I think one of my mantras, I mean, of course, everyone does collaboration differently, but I always want to be mindful of respecting what I don't know. And my musical knowledge in terms of music theory and things like that is minimal. I played, bad lesbian folk guitar as a teenager. That's about as far as it goes. So I know that Marie really is the expert in these things. So I try to weigh in, of course, at a high level about, this is the vibe I'm going for, and this is the intention. But in terms of how it actually plays out, I understand that she has knowledge that I don't, and so I like to give her a lot of space to exercise that.
Yeah, and likewise, I mean, I love to write, but I'm not a lyricist, right? So I can't say, well, this should rhyme more tightly or whatever, right? But I do know what I can make sing, and so that's part of the dialogue back for the lyrics.
And so, what are some of the inspirations behind the storyline? Is that what comes first, or do you have a musical idea first, or is it going along in parallel? Where does the spark begin?
You want to take this one, Dorie?
Sure. Certainly, we have sort of the plot ideas and the book ideas first, in terms of just what we're wanting to accomplish. So, with our first show that we worked on, Absolute Zero, we were looking around for an idea. There was actually a fellowship that had announced that they were having a cohort, a class, and it was specifically around like lesbian musical things. And we're like, oh, that's cool. What could we do for that? And so we're fishing around and looking for ideas. And I decided that one interesting starting point for ideation was I'm like, let's look at what's worked elsewhere. And so we looked at the list of the top 10 grossing films of all time. And very high up on the list was the James Bond series. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, that's amazing. What if we did spies? And that created a whole scenario for us. And then, Marie was off to the races because, we realized any spy story has to have a good villain. And Marie was in addition to music, she was a biology major in college. And so she had, a good villain needs a good plot. And she's like, what if they reached absolute zero? And I thought that was perfect. I didn't even know what absolute zero was, but she explained everything to me. And I said, yes, that's a plan. So we hashed it out, and then, of course, identified the key moments where songs would be needed, and worked to structure them there.
I have to interrupt for a second. Can you explain in a nutshell what absolute zero is?
So absolute zero is the point at which molecules stop moving. Okay, so it's a freezing point. It's negative 432 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that, or 0 Kelvin, which is another measurement of temperature. And essentially, it hasn't been reached in actual science reality. Scientists have gotten really close, but they haven't been able to get things cold enough so that molecules stop moving completely.
So it's an outstanding scientific puzzle, essentially.
Right, exactly. And so in our story, the villain she's a brainiac scientist, and she has reached absolute zero using a laser, and there's a lot of like kind of science fiction-y things that happen, and she's using it to destroy the world and exact revenge on the spy, who is her ex-girlfriend. And so that's the premise of the show, and it's been really fun because there's a lot you can do with the implications of using cold, right? Climate change is a thing right now. That's something that's in people's consciousness, and so it's kind of a way that we can talk about that in a little bit of a fun way.
That's terrific. So, what would you characterize the music? Is it something we've heard before? Is it something completely new? What are your influences, Marie, in the musical area?
So I'm very heavily influenced. You know, you can take the jazz band, the girl out of the jazz band, but you can't take the jazz band out of the girl. So you know, very heavily influenced by jazz and you know, kind of the 1970s super spy sound. Um, but but I've been really conscious about bringing that into the 21st century. Right, we are not. You know, we are not any of the spies that came before us. We are not any of those stories. We're something different. And so I'm
Also, we
also
can't yet afford a 40-piece orchestra. We're working
that
on
too. That too. You know, I mean, maybe when we get to Broadway, but we also want to be nimble. So my influences are very much Hadestown, Wicked, Fun Home. You know, a lot of the newer shows that have sort of a different sonic landscape that is just frankly more modern.
And is your heroine, if I can call her that, or your villain, what vocal range is your villain and your heroine?
So, Dorie, you probably will have some thoughts on this, but we have two heroines, right? One who is a very complicated spy who's older and so can sort of take on the alto range, and then we have an ingenue who is fast becoming our actual heroine. And Doria, I'll invite you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, one of the pieces of feedback, and you know, this is part of what's so interesting about the iterative process of musical theater, is that we've had, you know, multiple showcases and readings and workshops and things like that, and very frequently people would come up and tell us afterwards that the sidekick was their favorite character, and we kept hearing that. And at first, you know, our problem was like, well, you know, what are we doing wrong with the main character? How do we make her more relatable, or how do we make her more likable, or, you know, like, how do we make her a deeper, more complex character? And so, you know, those are all good questions to ask, and we were working on that. But eventually someone, a friend of mine who actually is a playwriting instructor at NYU, saw the show, saw our workshop that we did at Vassar's Powerhouse Theater this summer. And she actually said, why don't you make the sidekick the hero? And I'm like, oh my God, yes, we could do that. We could do that. And I think that actually sort of solves the problem in a lot of ways. So yes, we originally envisioned maybe more of a classic spy story with, you know, the troubled Byronic spy who's in the lead, you know, the inscrutable person. But it presents dramaturgical challenges, because if someone is kind of a little bit moody, a little bit hard to read, you know, that's hard to convey on stage and to actually make that person a sort of rootable hero. And what we've now come to in our latest revision is understanding, oh, you know, actually sort of what the story wants to be is essentially a kind of coming of age story about this rookie data analyst with the CIA who is on, you know, what is her first or one of her first assignments, and gets kind of thrown into the deep end and has to find her way both professionally and romantically.
Fantastic. Do you want to give us some musical examples? Did you want to share some of what you're working on?
Sure. So Dorie, if this is okay with you, I have one of My Word is My Bond reprises, because I think it's just so much fun. So Dorie and I, you know, many times when we've collaborated, we started in high COVID, and so everything was on the phone. Everything was on voice note, and now Dorie lives most of the time in Florida, right, or Boston, and so we're almost never in the same room. And in fact, we've only ever worked once in the same room on a show ever, and we've written 2 shows together. So
it's very mortifying for the people at BMI, because
yeah.
they're like, this is the way you sit in the room and you play the piano and you tinker together, and it's like, well, you know, we haven't really done that, but you know.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, Dorie and I also have businesses, and we're both very busy people, and so if we waited until we could be in the same room, we would have not written anything. You know, and I think that's just kind of the reality that we face. And so we've learned to collaborate remotely very, very well. And one of the things that I will do is I will send very long and meandering voice notes to Dorie, and she's very patient, and she'll listen to them and give me feedback from that. But I also work from Sibelius, and I'll sing along to Sibelius, which, you know, it's hard to hear orchestration. So I'm just kind of curious of what all of this sounds like. Now, mind you, I've taken about 10 voice lessons in my entire life, so I am not a singer. I'm also a little congested today. I don't know if you saw me sneezing. So we'll see how this sounds, but it'll give you a taste of sort of, you know, one of the climaxes of the show. And this is our villain, Elsa, admitting everything that she's done, essentially. So this is one of the climactic moments in the show. Elsa, our villain who freezes things, her name is Elsa on purpose. She is admitting that she has done this all because Sam, our spy, has broken her heart. So, oh, ever since we kissed, I knew you'd be just right. So what, you had a wife, I had some dynamite. So those poor little drug lords, they don't deserve the blame. I put her permanently out of her game. Jody felt the charge when my bomb went kaboom. A chemical reaction, this tower was a tomb. Sam, we should have been forever. Instead, I got conned. I'll destroy you just like Jody. My word is my bond. Sam, it's your fault. I turned to homicide. I'll turn the world to ice to match my heart inside. The world will feel the charge when I walk in the room. A chemical reaction, the world will be attuned. I thought that it was love. No, don't you dare respond. The world is gonna freeze. My word is my bond. And that's our big moment for our villain.
Fantastic. All right, I have to ask, what are the costumes? Are they lab coats? Are they, Bond type costumes? Tell me more.
We, in a lot of ways, we haven't quite gotten that far because we did a 29-hour reading, which is sort of street clothes. We did a workshop, which also doesn't really have formal costuming, but so far, typically people have been wearing, sort of black suits and just kind of, cool, sophisticated spy stuff. Although we actually did have a production at Ohio Wesleyan University, which was a full production last year. And the costuming there, they were very impressive because they went all out. And so they had our Sam, kind of the lead spy, in a very sophisticated suit. They had Lauren, who was one of the villains, actually in this amazing kind of like Britney Spears, Daisy Duke looking thing that was great. Elsa was a very commanding sort of, I don't know what we'd call her, like a sexy CEO. It was over the top and really fantastic costuming.
Yeah, she was wearing like silver knee-high boots and fishnets and hot pants.
Maybe a dominatrix CEO chemist.
Sort of, but like also with kind of a lab coat on. It was kind of amazing. And they really, really went all out for us. So it was nice to see the show on its feet. And, the musical theater development process is very slow and very kind of iterative. And so a lot of what we've seen has been people at stands or maybe one or two numbers choreographed.
Right. Yeah. Marie, did you ever play any Broadway when you were performing?
No, I've done quite a bit of music directing, but it's all been off Broadway. Mm-hmm. I sort of never got into playing on Broadway, but that remains to be one of those dreams of like, even if I sub in for 2 weeks at some point, I want to music direct on Broadway.
Yeah, it's a unique experience. I subbed a lot at the Lion King on Broadway.
How cool.
Yeah, it was fun, a lot of fun. I started when it was at the New Amsterdam Theater, and it was really like being in a submarine there. What was so interesting to see is that things are very blocked. Like since there are lots of things, people and things flying around the stage, they have to be extremely disciplined about the timing of things, the exact length of each number, where people are on the stage. You know, as a musician, and we have, you know, the musicians in the pit have to play with extreme precision. There is very little, if any, room for variation or improvisation, you know, because everything has to be so well timed and executed and coordinated with the stage. So it gives you a different appreciation, I think, for watching a show, like what goes into all the moving parts, shall we say. So it's really interesting where you all are at kind of the, you know, hashing out the storyline, the music, putting together all the components. It's like baking a very complex cake. Many ingredients that have to work.
It really is a different, it's a different talent and a different skill, I think, to play theater music. You know, when I was doing theater music with my jazz band, we focused a lot on improvisation and everything like that. And you just can't do that in the musical theater space. You know, especially as things, you know, if somebody's flying on a stage or a set piece is flying and there's no improvisation, you have to make sure you hit your mark and that's it. You know, or if a whole ensemble is dancing. And so it's been really interesting to see that side of the music direction happen. You know, so it's just an interesting look at like the different sides of the genre.
Yeah, what's celebrated in one is basically a fireable offense in the other.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, that's a good segue. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to what you all do in your other jobs, you know, the equally creative, but the ones that are focused on consulting and speaking. Could you talk a little bit about what you do when you're not writing musical theater?
Go ahead, Dorie, you go first.
Okay. Well, when I'm not writing musical theater, I am typically writing books, actually. So I've published 4. They're sort of in the business and career genre. My most recent is called The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. Marie actually is one of our case studies in the book. So anyone listening to the podcast should definitely pick it up so they can read all about Marie's adventures in the book. But it's basically a guide for professionals about how to avoid the pressures of short-termism, which are so endemic, and how to actually take a longer perspective so that we can accomplish a little bit more of what we claim that we want to. How do we get closer to our goals? And this is something that, of course, is very relevant in musical theater, where it would take an average of 8 years, maybe more, for a show to reach Broadway. Of course, A Strange Loop took 14. So you really have to be patient and play the long game when you're doing theater work. So that's sort of how I spend my time, is writing and speaking about the books, running online courses in communities related to that, etc. Marie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Dorie and I predate musical theater. She actually helped me start my business. And, you know, I was turning 30 and was working many, many odd jobs, as you do as a musician, and especially, you know, running a jazz band that focuses on living composers and recently deceased composers and everything like that. I was really just making my, you know, ends meet. And what that looked like was, you know, coming home with $15,000 a year in New York and living in a studio that was really kind of tiny and, you know, just doing everything I could to survive. And one day Dorie sent me a text message and was like, well, I have an idea for you. Why don't you quit your job? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? But the thing about Dorie is that she always has a plan, and she has this incredible foresight. And she was like, well, you're entrepreneurial. You can become a virtual assistant and figure out what people want from you and just give it a try. And I thought, well, what do I have to lose? And, I've always kind of lived my life that way of, I heard, I have to try, right? I have to try. And so I said, okay, I set a date for a couple of months in the future, and, got a couple of clients, and literally the rest is history. So my work and my practice has evolved. Now I do two things mainly. The first is digital marketing and social media, and getting people out and getting people's ideas out on the digital spaces. And the second thing is all around speaking. So getting people on in-person stages. And I've placed over 100 people on TEDx stages. I just placed 2 people at South by Southwest, building people's platforms so that they can speak about what they do and get in front of their ideal clients.
Phenomenal. It's just amazing. And so what I want to ask you is, for someone in the classical music space, like I've been for most of my career, what can you say to a classical musician about personal branding, and how important that is in our current life?
Well, I guess I can start with this. So the thing about classical music is that the brand is already there, right? We think of, you go to school, you play, this is why I was not a very good classical musician. You play Beethoven the way your teacher played Beethoven. There's a lot of sort of purism around that, and there's a lot of preservation around that. But there are people who have really wonderful personal brands. You think of Yo-Yo Ma, you think of Lang Lang, you think of people who do it differently, even though they preserve what is so great about classical music. And I think that that's something for artists today to lean into in the classical world.
And in general, for a performing artist or a speaker or someone who is doing their work through their face and their voice and their musical instrument, what do you recommend for people? I mean, where would one begin in such an endeavor?
I mean, I can dive in. I think when it comes to personal branding, oftentimes in the cultural conversation, people's minds immediately go to social media as the vehicle for personal branding. And I think it's important to emphasize that as a piece of it. That is certainly not the totality of it, because everybody has a personal brand even right this minute, and it's just how you're thought of by your peers and your colleagues. And so the first phase, I guess, the first circle of personal branding is really getting clear on how do you want to be known, and are you known that way amongst your audience, amongst your peers and colleagues, or is there sort of a gap or a disjunct? And so, for instance, a really great brand, on a sort of smaller scale for a classical musician might be, this person is really freaking reliable. If I call them, they always show up. They always make themselves available. If there's a gig, I can count on them. Their performances are impeccable. They're easy to work with. Those sound like basic things, but it actually sets you ahead of most other people, and it means that you will get the call rather than other people, because they say, oh, thank God, they're easy. And everybody's looking for a little bit more ease in their life. So that's kind of one circle about how do you get local gigs, and how do you get repeat gigs and things like that. Then there's sort of the next question of, okay, let's say you want to be Yo-Yo Ma. How do we get there? Which is a different question. It does involve perhaps more social media. It involves, a higher level of personal branding. But in many ways, it's actually just extending the premise. I mean, part of why Yo-Yo Ma is so famous and so successful is that his relationships and collaborations go outside the classical music space. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's networking and building relationships. It's just in a broader sphere. It's if you ask, basketball players, what classical musicians have you heard of? Well, he's probably the only one, maybe. and it's like, it wouldn't be surprising if Yo-Yo Ma and Michael Jordan teamed up on something, because like he's in those circles and he's doing things, but it's not that different necessarily than just, building your brand amongst your colleagues. It's a little bit, sometimes it can involve creativity. I mean, there's, I'm forgetting his name, and, I'm not in the classical world. So, all the classical people can be embarrassed for me, but that handsome guy, Joshua somebody, the violinist.
Joshua Bell.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And he did the thing very famously, where he played outside of the metro station in DC. And it's like, well, if they don't know if he's Joshua Bell, is he going to get the tips? Is anyone going to listen to him? And it was like an experiment and a collaboration with the media. That was interesting. That was a genuinely interesting question. And it got a ton of press, and it brought him notoriety in a broader sense. So I think it's looking for external collaborations. It's, looking for opportunities to kind of do something different or interesting. But fundamentally, it's like, you've got to work on your inner circle first so that you're respected and liked amongst your colleagues. And then you go to an outer circle where it's like, okay, where can I expand? Where can I build relationships that can actually be, make me and make classical music able to be kind of a crossover phenomenon?
Yeah. And the other thing is, this is a relationship business, like anything, right? You don't know who's going to grow up, and when you were in grad school, you didn't know who was sitting next to you, right? In our space, Lin-Manuel Miranda wasn't always Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? As he was an upstart musical writer who took a lot of people with him, right? And there are a lot of people probably that he loved working with, and there are a lot of people that he probably didn't love working with. And so it sounds basic, but on the most basic level, just be that person for people. Like, as writers, we have performers that we want to work with over and over and over again, because they're willing to show up and do, kind of whatever that we've rewritten or whatever crazy idea we have. Like, they're willing to try it with us, right? So I think it's the same thing in classical music. Sometimes, and there's classical music, like the people who play Beethoven, and there's classical music, the people who will play new composers' work, or who will sub in a jazz band, or who will play on Broadway. And you can really find different pockets of places that your personal brand can shine.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I feel like both of you, and not unlike myself, wear many hats, and had to change those hats from moment to moment in your careers. And I find it interesting in the context of personal branding. If you have to change hats for the various activities that you do, whether it's leading an organization, or it's playing a concert, or it's teaching students, or whatever it happens to be, writing a musical, juggling that with your consulting business, while you're getting on a plane to go give a TED Talk. How do you all manage the let's say array of hats, and which one you put on first?
Well, I'm the same person. It's like it's the saying, wherever you go, there you are, right? So I've become really kind of adept at code switching throughout my many worlds throughout the day, right? Like, I was just on a business call before this. I'm gonna jump off and go to a business call. I'm that person all the time, and so I think I bring my personal brand wherever I go. I might write about a Broadway show and the business applications that I learned from that. And so that attracts a certain sector of the business world that, they want me because they know I'm creative. They know that I'm bringing a different mind to things. So I've never been shy about mixing my worlds, and it's afforded me a really nice circle of people who, value my creativity.
I have to say also, I am so impressed with how transparent you are about the challenges you've had, quote unquote failures you've had, and how you've sort of pulled yourself, or I wouldn't even say pulled yourself, but just let those things go and move on, right? Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I find it personally, it's really inspiring to hear when a person has faced challenges, whether they be financial or what's the next step in the career or even relationships, and how those things inform the next step of that you take, step of action, or can you talk about that just a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, Dorie, do you want to start with the story that you always tell?
Oh, which story do I always tell?
The layoff on a
Oh.
certain date.
Yes, yes. Well, certainly I am in agreement with Marie that it's it both takes too much energy to put up some kind of facade, like, oh, come on, how tiring. but but also it's really not helpful, because ultimately, if we want to set a good example for other people and help create the world that we want, we need to be living that out, where people can just say what's real. And so, yes, what Marie was alluding to is, in my case, one facet of my origin story, you could say, is that I was working as a newspaper reporter, and I was in my very first job right out of graduate school. I was only a year into it, so it was pretty new. And I ended up getting laid off from that job, which surprised the heck out of me. Although it's not surprising now that a journalist would get laid off, but this was in the very early wave of that, where that was like, oh my God, how weird. But I got laid off, as it happened, on Monday, September 10th, 2001. And so the next day, September 11th, 2001, was like probably the world's worst date ever for shopping for a new job. So I was both existentially scared, like everybody was in the midst of that terrible day, but also economically, financially, it just everything shut down. Even literally the stock market stopped trading. So it seemed very bleak figuring out how to get a new job and how to support myself. So that scramble, essentially, of having to figure out what to do in those weeks afterwards, really was formative for me, in terms of making me acutely aware of both the need to reinvent ourselves, the need to be flexible, and the importance of not necessarily being too reliant on a given employer or a given income stream, but instead hedging our bets a little bit. So that has informed a lot of how I've looked at the world over the past couple of decades. Marie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so for me, Kate, I think you're probably referring to my latest LinkedIn newsletter. I would imagine. My first 6 years in business were hockey stick growth. All right, I doubled every single year from the time that I started, and so you get a little fearless when that happens. And I was like, well, this is always going to be me. I'm always going to be the successful entrepreneur, right? I had no fear. I was taking risks all over the place, and that growth stopped. And in 2022, when you get big, you have personnel problems. The government starts looking at you and going, wait a minute, why have you made all this money, and all of that. And so 23 was a really hard year for me, and I contracted. I was like, do I get a job? Do I close this? Do I, Dorie talked me off many a ledge. And one of the things she said to me was like, it's not always going to be negative. You hold on, because things will change eventually. And she was right. I mean, I spent 2024 rebuilding, but one of the things that I really started to think about was, how do I not make this my whole world, right? My business, which I so deeply found my identity in that business as a business owner, as a successful entrepreneur, and as somebody who works with ideas for a living. I said, okay, what else can I do? How do I start differentiating? Because what if something else happens? What if there's another pandemic? What if the stock market crashes? God forbid, right? All of these things could happen and my business could go away. So I've started to look at, okay, what else can I build into my world to make sure that I'm okay if this goes away. And so late last year, my partner and I started a cleaning business. And that's something that is completely outside of the realm of what I thought I would do in my life, right? And it's slowly growing. But it's something that's there in case my main business goes away, or in case I get too busy. I have something else that is making money, or what if I get sick? I have something else that's making money that somebody else is mostly running that we can grow. So
to be clear, you're not the one doing the scrubbing.
Correct. Yeah, it's more of like a dispatch kind of thing where, you know, we find the clients and we find the cleaners, right? So that's something that I've been doing to kind of future proof myself, right? To say like, okay, here is something else, another sector that I can work in that can make me some money.
Excellent. That's it's very pragmatic, and it's also inspiring that you know, in this this era that we live in, you know, we're constantly having to shift and dodge and surmount, and we are bombarded with information on a moment to moment basis. And something that you said kind of resonated with me. You know, when the pandemic happened, things shut down for everybody. It was particularly hard for musicians and teachers, and for me, after 2 weeks of teaching on Zoom, I thought I was going to jump off a bridge. I just thought, you know, I can't justify, or I can't even consider a life in music where I've spent most of my adult life learning and mastering my sound to have it go the way of compressed audio. It can't happen. I'm super passionate about that. So I developed this platform, MyBlueSkiesMusic, and so it prioritizes audio quality, which we heard a little bit of in your singing voice. And I think you can also tell that we can talk over each other, or there's no like sort of walkie-talkie type of situation where one person talks, the other person talks, and it cancels each other out. You know, this is about as humane and real a conversation one can have online. And I'm really excited, and I'm really proud of the technology. And now,
so is this new technology that you developed?
Yes, the software that we developed is patent pending. It's proprietary. I own it, and
wow.
The next iteration for me, I've had, you know, just a tremendous challenge in creating the platform to begin with, from a technology standpoint. How do we make it simple, and how do we make it work, and how does it, you know, get consistent? And now it's time to share it with other people. And for Marie to recommend doing a podcast about it, brilliant. It's just a brilliant idea to be able to get this out to many people, versus, you know, me calling up every person I know, which I will still do, but being able to sort of fan out and broadcast what we've accomplished is super important to me. You know, I'm at a point now where building the business is about bringing on subscribers, more users.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you. I'm just checking the time here. We should probably wrap it up. Is there anything you'd like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I just want to compliment you, Kate. What a great idea to do a podcast about the collaborative process. It's always so interesting to both have an excuse to delve into our process and collaboration, you know, more intensively. But also, I look forward to hearing a lot of other stories as your podcast progresses. So, thanks for having us on.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited about the guests that I've interviewed and people that are coming on. It seems to be right now focused on pairs of peoples. Either they're, you know, actually married to each other, but they're musical colleagues, and making creative projects together. So that's really what it's about for me, is how we work together, what inspires us to communicate with other people.
There was a book that came out maybe 5 years ago now, and if I have this right, I believe the author is named Joshua Wolf Schenk, and it's a book about pairs of collaborators. Might be interesting for you. He might even be a good podcast guest.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Well, any recommendations, I'd be most happy. Doesn't have to focus just on musicians. It can be any kind of collaborative work. Marie, do you want to say anything before we...
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say, like, I felt when you did the demo for me and you played your cello and I could hear just the richness of the sound. I think this deserves to be out in the wider world. I think that it's something that means something, and whether it's classical music or any artistic, like I could see doing a play reading on here and hearing the full depth of people's voices, and
Absolutely. I think it works for anything that you need
yeah.
good sound.
Exactly. More conversational as opposed to, you talk, then I talk, then you talk, then it's that kind of thing. So I love it. I think this is a great platform.
Great. Well, I hope you'll continue to use it. And I just want to thank you both for your time today. And hopefully we'll meet again soon. To check out our guests, Marie Incontrera, can you tell us how to find you online, how to find you in the world?
I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram at Marie Incontrera. And you can find me on my website, which is just my last name.com, so incontrera.com. And
Dorie, please let us know.
Yeah, thank you. Folks can find me at dorieclark.com, and they can learn more about our shows I have a tab, dorieclark.com/musicals, and that has information about our shows Absolute Zero and 23 and You and You and Me.
Wonderful. Thank you. And again, I'm Kate Dillingham, a host and founder of MyBlueSkiesMusic.com. And I'm going to give a little plug. I have a new album out called Ever Now, which is available on all the platforms. And it also came out of the time we were all shut down. And it's inspired by my practice of transcendental meditation. So thank you, everyone, for being here today, and I wish you well. And until next time, go lightly, stay creative. Remember, the connections you create can change everything.